At Boston's most glamorous gala, Juliet Langdon makes a stunning declaration that shatters tradition and shakes the city's elite. But is love worth the legacy she stands to lose? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning sun streamed through the massive windows of the Langdon estate, casting golden light across Juliet's bedroom. At 24, Juliet Langdon was the perfect picture of Boston high society. Her blonde hair fell in gentle waves past her shoulders, and her blue eyes sparkled with a hint of mischief that her mother had tried for years to suppress. Today was fitting day. The Winter Elegance Gala was only 6 weeks away, and everything had to be perfect. It always did. "Juliet, darling, the stylist is here." Margaret Langdon's voice carried up the grand staircase, perfectly pitched to sound pleasant, while demanding immediate co-compliance. Juliet sighed, putting down the book she'd been reading. Another day, another performance. She'd been trained for this role her entire life. As the only daughter of hotel magnate Richard Langdon, she was the crown jewel of their dynasty. The Winter Elegance Gala was her father's crowning achievement each year, a gathering of politicians, business titans, and social royalty that had become the premier event on Boston's social calendar. "Coming, Mother," she called back, her voice sweet and obedient. Downstairs, the main hall was already being prepared for the upcoming gala. Staff members moved efficiently through the space, measuring and planning. As Juliet descended the staircase, she noticed a man she hadn't seen before. He was tall with broad shoulders, working quietly in the corner, discussing something with the head of housekeeping. "Juliet, focus please," her mother said, noticing her distraction. "Mrs. Chen has brought 3 different fabric samples for your gown." "Sorry," Juliet replied, but her eyes drifted back to the stranger. Unlike the other staff members in their matching uniforms, he wore dark jeans and a simple button-down shirt that fit his athletic frame perfectly. He was handsome with deep brown skin and closely cropped hair. "That's the new night cleaning supervisor," Margaret said with a dismissive wave. "Your father hired him last month. Now, about these fabrics." For the next hour, Juliet stood still as pins were placed, measurements were taken, and decisions about her appearance were made for her. All the while, she kept stealing glances at the new staff member who worked with quiet efficiency, never drawing attention to himself. Later that evening, Juliet sat at dinner with her parents. The grand dining room echoed with the soft clink of silverware against fine china. "Senator Williams called today," Richard Langdon announced, cutting into his steak with precision. At 58, he maintained the commanding presence that had helped build Langdon Hotels into an international empire. "His son Bradley will be in town next week. I've invited him to dinner." Juliet kept her expression neutral, though her stomach tightened. She knew exactly what this dinner invitation meant. Bradley Williams, the handsome son of a US senator, had been on her father's shortlist of suitable matches for years. "That's wonderful news," Margaret said, smiling at Juliet. "You remember Bradley, darling? He's finished law school now and working in his father's office." "I remember," Juliet replied softly. Bradley Williams was everything her parents wanted for her, wealthy, well-connected, and ambitious. He was also arrogant and entitled, at least in the brief interactions she'd had with him at various social functions. "I expect you to make him feel welcome," Richard continued. "The Williams family could be very important to our expansion plans in Washington." Juliet nodded. This was nothing new. Her entire life had been orchestrated to benefit the family business. Her schools, her friends, her hobbies, all carefully selected to shape her into the perfect Langdon heiress. "Of course, father." After dinner, Juliet found herself restless. She wandered through the quiet hallways of the mansion until she reached the grand ballroom where the gala would be held. The doors were open, and the room was dimly lit. She stepped inside, imagining how it would look in 6 weeks, filled with flowers, music, and hundreds of guests in formal attire. She was startled by a movement in the far corner. The new staff member was there, methodically cleaning the ornate floor-to-ceiling windows. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to interrupt." He turned, and for the first time she saw his face clearly. He had kind eyes, deep brown and thoughtful. His features were strong and defined, with a quiet dignity that caught her off guard. "You're not interrupting," he replied, his voice deep and smooth. "This is your home." "I'm Juliet," she said, then immediately felt foolish. Of course, he knew who she was. "Jalen Price," he responded with a slight nod. "Night cleaning supervisor." There was something about the way he introduced himself, with a simple confidence that suggested he was stating a fact, not a station. He didn't lower his eyes or adopt the deferential posture she was used to seeing from staff. "Do you like it? Working here, I mean?" she asked, unsure why she was trying to prolong the conversation. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "It's a job, a good one. I work nights, so I can take sea lasses during the day." "Classes?" "Architecture. I'm finishing my master's degree at MIT. Juliet couldn't hide her surprise. An architecture student from one of the world's most prestigious universities was working as their night cleaner. Jalen seemed to read her thoughts. "Student loans are expensive, and night work pays better. Plus it's quiet, gives me time to think." Before she could respond, her mother's voice called from the hallway. "Juliet? Where are you, darling?" "I should go," Juliet said quickly. Jalen nodded, returning to his work without another word. As Juliet left the ballroom, she found herself unexpectedly flustered. There had been something in that brief exchange, a connection, a spark of interest, that felt dangerous and exciting all at once. The following week passed in a blur of gala preparations. Margaret had scheduled every moment of Juliet's days: fittings, meetings with the event planner, rehearsals for the traditional opening dance. But each night, Juliet found reasons to wander through the rooms where the night staff worked, hoping for another glimpse of Jalen. Sometimes they exchanged only brief nods or polite greetings. Other times, they managed a few minutes of conversation before being interrupted. She learned that he had grown up in Chicago, that he had an older sister who was a doctor, and that he hoped to start his own architectural firm focusing on sustainable community projects. In turn, she found herself sharing things she rarely talked about: her love of classic literature, her secret desire to travel without a schedule or entourage, her frustration with the endless social obligations that filled her calendar. On Thursday evening, Bradley Williams arrived for dinner. He was exactly as Juliet remembered: conventionally handsome with perfectly styled blonde hair, expensive clothes, and a practiced smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Juliet, you look more beautiful every time I see you," he said, kissing her cheek as if they were old friends rather than occasional acquaintances. Richard beamed with approval. "Bradley has just been appointed to the Senate Committee on Banking. Quite an achievement for someone his age." "My father made sure I was prepared," Bradley replied with false modesty. "Just. Tears, I'm sure you've prepared Juliet for her role in the Langdon legacy." Dinner was excruciating. Bradley dominated the conversation, talking about his political connections and future ambitions. Richard encouraged him, while Margaret watched Juliet with eagle eyes, silently commanding her to show appropriate interest. "The Winter Elegance Gala is the perfect opportunity to announce our partnership," Richard said as dessert was served. "Bradley, we'd be honored if you would escort Juliet as her official date." Juliet's head snapped up. "Father, you didn't mention this to me." "It's a natural pairing," Margaret interjected smoothly. "You and Bradley make such a handsome couple." "I'd be delighted," Bradley said, reaching across the table to take Juliet's hand. His touch felt cold and possessive. Later that night, Juliet escaped to the ballroom again. She was angry and felt trapped. Once again, her parents had made decisions about her life without consulting her. The ballroom was empty except for Jalen, who was working on one of the crystal chandeliers. He climbed down from the ladder when he saw her. "Everything okay?" he asked, noticing her distress. "No," she admitted. "My parents have decided who I'm taking to the gala without asking me. They've practically arranged my entire future without asking me." Jalen was quiet for a moment. "And what future would you choose for yourself?" The question caught her off guard. No one had ever asked her that before. "I'm not sure," she said honestly, "but I'd like the chance to find out." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Sometimes the hardest thing is standing up for your own life." They talked for nearly an hour. Juliet found herself opening up about the pressure she felt, the constant expectation to be perfect, to represent the Langdon name flawless, sly. Jalen listened without judgment, occasionally sharing his own experiences of working hard to create opportunities for himself against significant odds. When she finally returned to her room, Juliet felt lighter somehow. Talking with Jalen had given her a new perspective. For the first time, she began to question whether she wanted the life her parents had planned for her. Over the next 2 weeks, Juliet found more opportunities to talk with Jalen. Each conversation deepened their connection. She discovered that beneath his quiet exterior was a man of strong principles and ambitious dreams. He challenged her thinking without being confrontational, and she found herself looking forward to their conversations more than any other part of her day. One night, she brought him coffee during his break. They sat on the back terrace, looking out over the manicured gardens. "Why do you put up with it?" Jalen scared suddenly. "Being told who to be, who to date, how to live." Juliet stared into her cup. "It's complicated. I love my family. This hotel chain is my father's life's work. He expects me to help protect and expand it. By marrying the right person? By being a perfect accessory?" His words stung because they contained truth. "You make it sound so simple," she said. "Just walk away from everything I've ever known." "Not simple," Jalen corrected. "Necessary. At some point, you have to decide if you're living your life or the one someone else designed for you." As the gala drew closer, preparations intensified. Juliet went through the motions, attending final fittings and approving floral arrangements, all while dreading the thought of spending the evening on Bradley Williams' arm. 3 days before the event, Richard held a dinner for the gala committee members. The dining room was filled with Boston's elite, all discussing the upcoming event with enthusiasm. Bradley sat beside Juliet, his hand resting possessively on the back of her chair. Jalen was there too, directing the additional staff hired for the evening. He moved efficiently around the edges of the room, making sure everything ran smoothly. Juliet found her eyes drawn to him repeatedly throughout the meal. "The guest list this year is exceptional," Richard announced proudly. 2 senators, a governor, and at least a dozen CEOs. The Winter Elegance Gala has truly become the premier social event in Boston. "And the perfect setting to strengthen advantageous connections," Bradley added, giving Juliet a meaningful look that made her skin crawl. Richard laughed, raising his glass. "Indeed. Speaking of which, I believe my daughter and the senator's son make quite the power couple." The guests murmured their agreement, several casting appraising looks at Juliet and Bradley. At that moment, Jalen moved past their table, quietly replacing an empty water pitcher. Richard glanced at him, then back at his guests with a smirk. "We should thank the help. Without him, the floors might reflect our mistakes." The guests chuckled politely at the poor joke. Juliet watched Jalen's face remain perfectly composed, not a flicker of reaction showing as he continued his work. But she saw the slight tightening of his jaw, the almost imperceptible straightening of his shoulders. Something snapped inside her. Weeks of growing resentment, of feeling like a pawn in her parents' social chess game, of watching Jalen being treated as invisible despite his intelligence and dignity, it all crystallized in that moment. Juliet stood up slowly, her chair scraping against the floor. The room quieted. "Actually, Father," she said, her voice soft but clear, "I won't be attending with Bradley." Richard's smile froze. "Juliet, this isn't the time. I'm bringing someone else as my date." She turned and looked directly at Jalen, who had stopped in his tracks watching her with surprised eyes. "I'm bringing Jalen." The silence that followed was absolute. Margaret's face drained of color. Bradley's mouth opened and closed without sound, and Richard's expression darkened dangerously. "Juliet," he said through clenched teeth, "steep outside with me, now." "No," she replied, surprising herself with her calm defiance. "I'm not joking, and I'm not seeking attention. I'm simply informing you of my choice of date for the gala." She walked across the room to where Jalen stood, his eyes never leaving hers. The guests watched in stunned silence. "Would you stand beside me?" she asked him quietly, aware that her entire future might hang on his answer. "At the gala. As my date." Jalen didn't respond immediately. His eyes searched hers, perhaps looking for sincerity, or perhaps weighing the consequences of what she was asking. Finally, he gave a single, slow nod. "Yes," he said, "I would." Behind them, Richard's voice thundered, "This is absurd. Juliet, return to the table immediately." But Juliet didn't move. For the first time in her life, she had made a choice entirely her own. And standing there, meeting Jalen's steady gaze, she knew it was the right one. The dinner ended in chaos. The guests departed quickly, eager to spread the gossip about Richard Langdon's rebellious daughter. Bradley stormed out, his face red with humiliation, and Juliet found herself locked in her father's study, facing the full force of his anger. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Richard demanded, pacing the room like a caged animal. "You've embarrassed this family in front of our most important connections. You've insulted Bradley and his father. For what? To make some kind of political statement?" "It's not a statement," Juliet said, standing her ground despite her racing heart. "I'm simply choosing who I want to attend the gala with." "He's a member of the cleaning staff," Margaret cried, dabbing at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. "People will think you've lost your mind." "Or worse," Richard growled. "They'll think you're doing this to deliberately sabotage everything we've built. I'm doing this because I've spent time talking with Jalen. He's intelligent, kind, and ambitious. He's studying architecture at MIT, did you know that? He has dreams and goals that have nothing to do with social climbing or using people for connections." "Oh, Juliet," Margaret sighed. "You're being naive. What do you think he wants from you? A Langdon heiress could open many doors for someone like him." The suggestion that Jalen might be using her stung, but Juliet pushed the thought aside. "You don't know him. I do." Richard sat heavily behind his desk. "This ends now. You will call Bradley tomorrow and apologize. You will explain that you were overtired and speaking nonsense, and you will attend the gala with him as planned." Juliet took a deep breath. "No, Father, I won't." "Then you leave me no choice," Richard said, his voice cold. "Either you comply with our wishes, or you will be disinherited. No access to your trust fund, no position in the company, no place in this family." Margaret gasped. "Richard, surely that's too extreme." But Juliet saw the determination in her father's eyes. He meant every word. "You have until tomorrow morning to come to your senses," he said dismissively. "Now go to your room." As Juliet climbed the stairs to her bedroom, she felt strangely calm. For the first time in her life, she had stood up for herself, for what she truly wanted. Whatever happened next, she wouldn't regret that. But as she reached her door, doubt began to creep in. Had she been impulsive? Was she risking everything for a man she barely knew? And most troubling of all, was her mother right? What if Jalen was only interested in what she could offer him as a Langdon? Tomorrow would bring hard choices and consequences, but tonight, despite the uncertain, tie ahead, Juliet fell asleep with a strange sense of freedom, the first taste of a life that might truly be her own. Morning light filtered through the curtains as Juliet sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her phone. She had barely slept, her mind racing with doubts and questions. Had she made a terrible mistake? Was she throwing away her entire future on an impulsive decision? A gentle knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Langdon?" IT was Mrs. Reynolds, the housekeeper who had worked for the family since Juliet was a child. "Your parents are expecting you for breakfast in 15 minutes. "Thank you, Mrs. Reynolds. I'll be down shortly." Juliet dressed carefully, choosing a simple blue dress that her mother had always approved of. If she was going to stand her ground, she wanted to do it without provoking unnecessary conflict. Downstairs, the atmosphere in the dining room was frigid. Richard sat at the head of the table, hidden behind his newspaper. Margaret sipped her tea, her face a mask of disapproval. "Good morning," Juliet said quietly, taking her seat. Richard lowered his newspaper, his expression stern. "Have you come to your senses?" Juliet took a deep breath. "I'm not changing my mind, Father. I want to bring Jalen to the gala." "This is ridiculous," Margaret said, setting down her teacup with a sharp clink. "What will people say? The Langdon heiress with a janitor." "He's not just a janitor," Juliet replied, trying to keep her voice steady. He's getting his master's degree in architecture from MIT. He works nights to pay for his education." Richard's face darkened. I don't care if he's secretly a rocket scientist. You are a Langdon. You have responsibilities to this family and our legacy. And what about my responsibility to myself? To my own happiness? Happiness? Richard scoffed. You think happiness comes from following every fleeting emotion? Happiness comes from security, from building something that lasts. Something Bradley Williams could help you achieve. Bradley doesn't care about me, Juliet said. He cares about what I represent. Connections, money, status. And you think this night cleaner cares about you for yourself? Margaret asked, her voice dripping with skepticism. Be realistic, Juliet. What could he possibly want from the daughter of Richard Langdon except advantage? The question hit Juliet like a slap. It was the same doubt that had kept her awake much of the night. I believe he does, she said, with more confidence than she felt. But even if you're right, I'd rather take that chance than marry someone I know doesn't love me. No one is talking about marriage, Richard said impatiently. We're talking about a date to the gala. We all know it's more than that, Juliet replied. Bradley's father has been pushing for this match for years. You see it as the perfect business alliance. Richard slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. Enough. I've given you a choice. Either you attend the gala with Bradley as planned, or you face the consequences. No trust fund, no position in the company, no place in this family. Juliet felt her heart racing, but she held her father's gaze. Then I guess I'll face the consequences. She stood up, her breakfast untouched, and walked out of the dining room. Behind her, she heard her mother's soft sobs and her father's angry muttering. In her room, Juliet paced back and forth, trying to calm her nerves. What had she done? Had she just destroyed her relationship with her parents over a man she barely knew? Part of her wanted to run back downstairs, apologize, and agree to her father's demands. It would be easier, safer. But another part, a part that felt more authentically her than anything she'd experienced before, refused to back down. For once in her life, she had made a choice based on her own feelings, her own desires. How could she surrender that newfound freedom so quickly? She needed to talk to Jalen, to make sure he understood what was happening, what he was getting involved in. He deserved to know the storm that was coming. Juliet grabbed her coat and slipped out of the house. It was Saturday, which meant Jalen wouldn't be working at the mansion. But she remembered him mentioning that he lived in an apartment near the university. With a quick search on her phone, she found the address of the building. 30 minutes later, she stood outside his door, her hand raised to knock, suddenly uncertain. What if he didn't want to see her? What if her mother was right, and he was only interested in what she could offer as a Langdon? Before she could reconsider, the door opened. Jalen stood there in jeans and a simple grey t-shirt, looking surprised to see her. Juliet, is everything okay? I'm sorry for showing up unannounced, she said quickly. I needed to talk to you about last night. He stepped back, inviting her in. His apartment was small but neat, with architectural drawings pinned to one wall and bookshelves overflowing with textbooks and novels. I've been expecting fallout, he said, gesturing for her to sit on the small sofa. Your father didn't look happy. That's an understatement, Juliet replied with a weak smile. He's threatened to disinherit me if I don't change my mind. Jalen's expression grew serious. That's extreme. That's my father. He believes in using whatever leverage he has to get his way. She looked down at her hands. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Okay. Why did you say yes? To being my date for the gala? My mother thinks... She thinks you're just using me for connections or opportunities. Jalen was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes thoughtful. Finally, he said, I'd be lying if I said the thought didn't cross my mind. Not about using you, but about whether that's what you were doing. Using me to rebel against your parents. The accusation stung, but Juliet couldn't deny there was some truth to it. Maybe at first, when I spoke up at TIE dinner, it was partly about defying my father. But it's more than that now. What is it then? In the past few weeks, talking with you has been the only time I've felt real. Like I'm not playing a role or meeting someone else's expectations. You see me as a person, not as the Langdon heiress. Jalen nodded slowly. I understand that feeling, Growing up, people had a lot of expectations about who I should be, what I could achieve. It took me a long time to figure out what I actually wanted. And what did you want? To build things that matter, spaces that make people's lives better. He gestured to the drawings on his wall. That's my final project. Affordable housing that's actually beautiful, sustainable, and built for community. Juliet stood up and walked over to examine the drawings. They were impressive, innovative designs that looked nothing like the sterile, blocky, affordable housing she'd seen before. "These are amazing," she said sincerely. "Thanks." He came to stand beside her. "Look, Juliet, I said yes because I enjoy spending time with you. Because when we talk, it feels like we're connecting on a level that has nothing to do with your family name or my job title. But I won't be your secret, and I won't be your spectacle. Just your equal." His words were exactly what she needed to hear. "That's what I want too." "Are you sure?" Because from what you're telling me, the cost might be higher than you realize. Your entire life, your future." "My entire life and future have been planned by other people," Juliet said firmly. "Maybe it's time I started figuring out what I actually want." Jalen smiled, a warm, genuine smile that made her heart skip. "Okay then, I guess we're going to a gala." As Juliet left Jalen's apartment, she felt a new sense of determination. Whatever happened next, she knew she was making the right choice. For herself, not just in defiance of her parents. The next 2 weeks were among the most difficult of Juliet's life. At home, her parents alternated between icy silence and renewed attempts to change her mind. Margaret tried tearful pleas about family loyalty and tradition. Richard made thinly veiled threats about her financial future. "You've never had to work a day in your life," he reminded her during Oni's particularly heated argument. "You have no idea what it's like to struggle to go without." "Maybe that's exactly what I need to learn," Juliet replied. Outside the family, the situation was even worse. Word of her rebellion had spread through Boston's elite social circles like wildfire. Former friends stopped returning her calls. Invitations dried up. Even people who had known her since childhood suddenly became distant. Bradley Williams was particularly vindictive. He gave an interview to a Society columnist, painting himself as the victim of a spoiled heiress's attention-seeking behavior. "I feel sorry for Juliet," he was quoted saying. "Clearly she's going through some kind of crisis. The Langdons have always put a lot of pressure on her to be perfect." The article strongly implied that Juliet was mentally unstable, possibly even using drugs. It was a calculated character assassination design, Ned to protect Bradley's pride and political future. When Juliet saw the article, she broke down in tears. She had expected resistance, even anger, but not this level of cruelty. That evening, Jalen came to see her. They met in a small coffee shop far from the Langdon estate, where they were unlikely to be recognized. "I saw the article," he said, his face grim. "I'm sorry you're going through this." "It's not your fault," Juliet said, wiping away a St. Ray tear. "Bradley always was a vindictive jerk." "We don't have to do this," Jalen said quietly. "You could still change your mind. Make peace with your family, I'd understand." Juliet looked at him surprised. "Are you backing out?" "No. But I want to make sure you understand what you're sacrificing. This isn't just about one night or one event. These people are trying to destroy your reputation." "Let them try," Juliet said, a new hardness in her voice. "If they only valued me for my family name and social status, then maybe I don't need them in my life." Jalen reached across the table and took her hand. His touch was warm and comforting. "Just remember, you're not alone in this." As the gala approached, practical concerns became more pressing. Jalen needed a tuxedo, and Juliet's original gown, a design her mother had approved, no longer felt right. Surprisingly, it was Mrs. Reynolds, the housekeeper, who came to their aid. She had a nephew who worked as a tailor, and she arranged for him to fit Jalen for a tuxedo at a fraction of the usual cost. "My Thomas is very talented," she told Juliet when they met secretly in the garden. "He trained in London before coming back to help his mother when she got sick." "Why are you helping us?" Juliet asked. "My father would fire you if he found out." Mrs. Reynolds smiled knowingly. "I've worked for your family for 20 years. I've watched you grow up. And I've never seen you stand up for yourself the way you have these past weeks. She patted Juliet's hand. Sometimes the right path isn't the easiest one. For her own gown, Juliet decided to use her savings to buy something completely different from what had been planned. She found a small boutique where the designer helped her choose a stunning midnight blue dress that was elegant but less formal her original selection. You have the perfect figure for this silhouette, the designer told her. It's modern, confident, very different from what we usually see at these society events. When Juliet tried on the finished dress, she hardly recognized herself. The woman in the mirror looked sophisticated, independent, and most importantly, genuine. The night before the gala, Richard made one final attempt to change Juliet's mind. He called her into his study, where he sat behind his massive desk like a judge about to pass sentence. "Tomorrow is your last chance," he said without preamble. "Come to the gala with Bradley and all will be forgiven. This phase of rebellion will be forgotten." "It's not a phase, Father," Juliet replied calmly. "It's a choice, my choice." Richard's face hardened. "Then you leave me no option. Effective immediately, your credit cards are cancelled, your trust fund is frozen, your position in the company is revoked." Despite expecting this, the words still hurt. Juliet had never known any life but one of privilege and security. The reality of being cut off was frightening. "Is that all?" she asked, proud that her voice didn't waver. "No," Richard said coldly. "After the gala, I expect you to move out. If you're so determined to make your own way, you can do it under your own roof." Juliet nodded, a strange calm settling over her. "I understand." As she turned to leave, Richard called after her. "He won't stay, you know. Once he realizes you have nothing to offer him, no money, no connections, no advantage, he'll move on to someone who does." Juliet paused, her hand on the doorknob. "If that happens, then at least I'll know the truth, but I think you're wrong about him and about me." She closed the door quietly behind her, then leaned against the wall, her heart pounding. She had just lost everything she had ever known, her family, her security, her entire future as she had imagined it. And yet, strangely, she didn't feel despair. Instead, there was a flicker of something that felt like freedom. The day of the Winter Elegance Gala dawned clear and cold. By tradition, Juliet should have been at the estate, overseeing last-minute preparations and getting ready with her mother and their usual team of stylists. Inzi, Tade. She was in a small hotel room she had booked with the last of her accessible funds. Her new dress hung on the closet door. Her makeup and hair supplies were spread across the bathroom counter. For the first time, she would be preparing for a major event entirely on her own. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. At 5 o'clock, there was a knock on her door. She opened it to find Jalen standing there, and the sight of him took her breath away. The tuxedo fit him perfectly, accentuating his broad shoulders and athletic build. He looked elegant, sophisticated, and completely at ease. Nothing like the night cleaner her father had dismissed so cruelly. "You look amazing," she said, suddenly shy. "So do you," he replied, his eyes warm with admiration. Juliet had done her own hair in a simple, elegant style, with soft waves framing her face. Her makeup was lighter than what her mother would have approved, letting her natural beauty shine through. "Are you ready for this?" Jalen asked, offering his arm. Juliet took a deep breath. "As ready as I'll ever be." They took a taxi to the Langdon Grand Hotel, where the gala was being held. As they approached the entrance, Juliet felt her anxiety rising. Photographers lined the red carpet, capturing the arrivals of Boston's elite. Would they be stopped? Turned away? "We can still change our minds," Jalen said quietly, sensing her nervousness. Juliet squared her shoulders. "No, we belong here as much as anyone." As they stepped onto the red carpet, a wave of whispers spread through the crowd. Photographers turned their cameras toward them, flashbulbs popping in rapid succession. Juliet heard her name being called from multiple directions. "Miss Langdon, over here." "Juliet, who's your date? Look this way, please." She had expected hostility, perhaps even ridicule. Instead, there was an undeniable buzz of interest and excitement. The society columnists, who had been so quick to repeat Bradley's allegations, were now eagerly snapping photos of the rebellious heiress and her mysterious date. Jalen placed his hand gently on the small of her back, a reassuring presence as they made their way through the gauntlet of cameras. His confidence was steady, unshakable. He smiled for the photographs without appearing either intimidated or overly eager for attention. At the entrance to the ballroom, Margaret stood greeting guests. Her face froze when she saw Juliet and Jalen approaching. "Mother," Juliet said formally, "you remember Jalen Price?" Margaret's smile was brittle. "Of course. How unexpected to see you both." "The invitation said I could bring a +1, Juliet replied with forced lightness. "Jalen was kind enough to accompany me." Before Margaret could respond, another group of guests arrived, forcing her to move on with her hosting duties. Juliet and Jalen continued into the ballroom. The grand space had been transformed into a winter wonderland. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, while thousands of white lights twinkled among arrangements of white roses and silver branches. Ice sculptures stood at each corner of the room, and a full orchestra played classical music from a raised platform. As they entered, conversations paused. Heads turned. Juliet felt the weight of hundreds of stares. "They'll stare," she whispered to Jalen, adjusting his bow tie with gentle fingers. "Let them." Jalen's eyes met hers, filled with a mixture of pride and affection. Ready to give them something to stare at? He took her hand and led her to the dance floor, where only a few couples were dancing. The orchestra was playing a waltz, its sweeping mellow, filling the cavernous space. Juliet had danced at countless events like this, always with partners chosen for their social standing rather than their dancing ability. But she had never experienced anything like dancing with Jalen. He moved with natural grace and confidence, leading her through the steps as if they had danced together 100 times before. There was no awkwardness, no hesitation, just the perfect synchronicity of two people complete lie in tune with each other. As they glided across the floor, Juliet became aware that other couples had stepped back, giving them space. The entire room was watching their dance. "Where did you learn to dance like this?" she asked, breathless with surprise and delight. Jalen smiled. "My grandmother taught me. She said a gentleman should always know how to waltz." From the corner of her eye, Juliet could see her father standing with Bradley Williams and Senator Williams. All three men were watching with thunderous expressions. "My father looks like he's about to have a stroke," she murmured. "Should we stop?" "Absolutely not," Juliet replied, her smile widening. "This is the most fun I've ever had at one of these events." As the waltz ended, applause rippled through the room. Hesitant at first, then growing stronger. Whatever people might think about Juliet's choice of date, they couldn't deny the elegance of their dance. The moment was broken by Bradley Williams, who approached with a champagne glass in hand and a sneer on his handsome face. "Quite a performance," he said, his voice just loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "I didn't realize the help was so accomplished." Jalen's expression remained neutral, but Julie TTE felt him tense beside her. "Bradley," she said coldly, "I believe you've met Jalen Price. He's an architecture graduate student at MIT. Bradley's eyes narrowed. "Is that what they're calling it these days? I thought he was the man who mops the floors." Several onlookers gasped at the rudeness of the comment. Juliet felt her cheeks burning with anger, but before she could respond, Jalen spoke. "I do mop the floors," he said calmly. "I also design BILdings, dance the waltz, and treat people with respect regardless of their job title. Perhaps someday you'll learn to do the same." Bradley's face flushed with anger. "You think you belong here with these people? With her?" He gestured dismissively at Juliet. "She's using you to make a point to embarrass her family. Once she's had her little rebellion, she'll go back to where she belongs." "And where is that exactly?" Juliet demanded. "With people like us," Bradley said, gesturing around the room. "People of her class, her background." "I believe," Jalen said, his voice still calm but with an edge of steel, "that Juliet is capable of deciding for herself where she belongs and who she belongs with." Bradley took a step closer, his posture aggressive. "You think you can just walk in here and take what isn't yours? A man like you with a woman like her?" The ugliness behind his words was unmistakable. A shocked silence fell over the nearby guests. Jalen's eyes hardened, but his voice remained steady. I haven't taken anything. I was invited by a remarkable woman who had the courage to make her own choice. He turned to Juliet. Would you care for some champagne? Grateful for his dignity in the face of Bradley's hostility, Juliet nodded. They walked away, leaving Bradley fuming behind them. I'm so sorry, she whispered as they reached the champagne. A fountain. That was horrible. It's not your fault, Jalen replied, and it's nothing I haven't heard before, though usually not in such expensive surroundings. How can you be so calm? Jalen handed her a glass of champagne. Getting angry wouldn't change his mind. It would just confirm what he already believes about me. Juliet looked at him with newfound admiration. In the face of blatant prejudice, he had maintained his dignity and composure. It was a kind of strength she had rarely witnessed in her privileged world. As the evening progressed, Juliet began to notice something unexpected. While some guests deliberately avoided them, others approached with genuine curiosity. A prominent architect who served on the MIT advisory board recognized Jalen from a student showcase and engaged him in a lengthy conversation about his thesis project. The wife of a tech CEO complimented Juliet on her refreshing independence. Not everyone was hostile. Not everyone was judgmental. There were people, even in this rarefied world, who valued authenticity over conformity. Around midnight, as the gala was reaching its peak, Richard Langdon finally approached them. His face was a mask of controlled anger. Juliet, he said stiffly, a word in private. Anything you have to say to me, you can say in front of Jalen, she replied, holding her ground. Richard's jaw tightened. Very well. I want to make sure you understand the consequences of your actions tonight. This isn't a game. This isn't a temporary rebellion you can walk back from when you get tired of it. I know exactly what I'm doing, Father. Do you? You've embarrassed this family in front of everyone who matters in Boston. You've aligned yourself with... He glanced at Jalen with barely disguised contempt. With someone completely unsuitable. All to prove some childish point about independence. Juliet felt a surge of anger. This isn't about proving a point. This is about living my own life, making my own choices. Choices have consequences, Richard said coldly. I've made mine clear. Now you need to make yours. He turned and walked away, leaving Juliet trembling with a mixture of anger and hurt. She had known this confrontation was coming, had prepared for it, but the reality of her father's rejection still cut deep. Jalen took her hand. Are you okay? No, she admitted, but I will be. As the gala began to wind down, Juliet and Jalen found themselves on the terrace overlooking the hotel gardens. The night was cold, but clear, with stars visible despite the city lights. Thank you, Juliet said softly, for standing by me tonight, for facing all of this with such dignity. Jalen turned to her, his expression serious. I need to ask you something important. What is it? Are you sure about this? About defying your family, risking your future? For what? For me? We barely know each other. Juliet considered his question carefully. Maybe it started as defiance. Maybe I was just tired of being told what to do, who to be. But it's become something more than that. What? A chance to find out who I really am, what I really want. Not what my parents want for me or what society expects of me, but what I choose for myself. She looked up at him. And yes, part of it is about you, about how I feel when I'm with you, like I can be myself without pretense or performance. Jalen reached out, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. I feel the same way. The moment was interrupted by a commotion from inside the ballroom. Through the glass doors, they could see Richard Langdon in what appeared to be a heated argument with Senator Williams. We should go, Juliet said. I've made my point. There's no need to keep provoking them. As they made their way through the ballroom toward the exit, the crowd parted before them. Some faces showed disapproval, others curiosity, and a few, particularly among the younger guests, showed something like admiration. At the main entrance, they found themselves face to face with Richard once more. His face was flushed with anger, his eyes cold. Walk out with him, he said, his voice low and threatening, and don't come back. The ultimatum hung in the air between them. Behind Richard stood Margaret, her eyes pleading silently with her daughter. Juliet looked at Jalen, then back at her father. In that moment, her entire life seemed to hang in the balance, the security and privilege she had always known on one side, an uncertain future on the other. She took Jalen's hand and stepped forward, moving past her father without a word. Outside, the cold night air hit her like a physical shock. The reality of what she had just done, walking away from her family, her inheritance, her entire planned future, suddenly felt overwhelming. "What have I done?" she whispered. Jalen squeezed her hand. "You've made a choice. Your choice." As they descended the steps, photographers called her name, their cameras flashing. The society columnists would have a field day with this story, the Langdon heiress choosing a night cleaner over her family's empire. But for the first time in her life, Juliet didn't care what they wrote about her. She had found something more valuable than her family name or social status. She had found her voice, her courage, and perhaps even her heart. With Jalen beside her, she walked away from the Langdon Grand Hotel and toward an uncertain but authentic future. One that, for the first time, would truly be her own. The morning after the gala, Juliet woke up in her hotel room feeling strangely light. For the first time in her life, there was no schedule to follow, no family expectations to meet. The freedom was both exhilarating and terrifying. Her phone had been buzzing all night with notifications. Headlines like, "Langdon heiress shocks Boston elite," and "Hotel dynasty daughter chooses cleaner over senator's son" flooded the local news sites. Photos of her and Jalen leaving the gala hand in hand were everywhere. She ignored the news alerts and opened her messages. There were dozens from people she had considered friends, some expressing shock, others offering support, and many just fishing for gossip. None from her parents. A knock on her door made her heart jump. For a wild moment, she thought it might be her father, come to apologize or to make one last attempt to bring her back in line. Instead, it was Jalen, holding 2 cups of coffee and a paper bag. "Breakfast," he said with a smile. "I figured you might not want to face the hotel restaurant this morning." Juliet let him in, suddenly conscious of her rumpled appearance. She had slept in an oversized t-shirt, her makeup was smudged, and her hair was a tangled mess. "I must look terrible," she said, trying to smooth her hair. "You look beautiful," Jalen replied simply. "Real." They sat by the window, drinking coffee and sharing the bagels he had brought. Outside, the city was waking up, unaware that Juliet Langdon's life had just been turned upside down. "What happens now?" Jalen asked after a while. Juliet sighed. "I need to go home, to the estate, and pack my things. My father was serious about me moving out. Do you want me to come with you?" She considered his offer. Having Jalen beside her would give her strength, but it might also make the situation more volatile. "I think I need to do this myself. Make a clean break." Jalen nodded, understanding. "Where will you go?" "I don't know yet." Juliet had never had to think about something as basic as where she would live. The reality of her new situation was starting to sink in. "I have some savings in a personal account, enough to get me started until I figure things out." "You could stay with me," Jalen offered. "It's small, but there's room." The offer touched her deeply, but she shook her head. "Thank you, but I think I need to stand on my own 2 feet, prove to myself and to my parents that I can make it without depending on anyone." "I understand." Jalen reached across the table and took her hand. "But remember, asking for help doesn't mean you're not independent. It just means you're human." Later that morning, Juliet returned to the Langdon estate. The house was quiet, with most of the staff busying themselves in other rooms. Mrs. Reynolds met her at the door, her kind face filled with concern. "Your parents are out," she said softly. "Your father has meetings all day and your mother is at her club." Relief washed over Juliet. She had been dreading another confrontation. "Thank you, Mrs. Reynolds. I'm just here to pack my things." The housekeeper nodded sadly. "I took the liberty of bringing some boxes to your room." Upstairs, Juliet faced the daunting task of deciding what to take and what to leave behind. Her closet was filled with designer clothes, most chosen by her mother to project the right image. Her shelves held trophies and awards from years of activities selected to enhance her college applications. How much of this actually belonged to her? How much represented the real Juliet, not the one crafted by her parents' expectations? In the end, she packed most steely practical items, comfortable clothes, a few cherished books, photos of happier times with her family. She left behind most of the trappings of her privileged life, including the expensive jewelry her father had given her for various milestone birthdays. As she was closing her suitcase, there was a soft knock on the door. Her mother stood there looking smaller and older than Juliet remembered. "You're really leaving," Margaret said. "It wasn't a question. Father didn't give me much choice." Margaret came into the room, glancing at the packed boxes. "He'll calm down eventually. He always does." "And then what? I come back and pretend none of this happened? Go back to being the perfect Langdon daughter?" Juliet shook her head. "I can't do that anymore, Mother." "Because of this man?" Margaret couldn't quite bring herself to say Jalen's name. "Because of me," Juliet corrected. "Because I need to find out who I am when I'm not trying to please you and Father." Margaret sat on the edge of the bed, smoothing the comforter with nervous hands. "We only wanted what was best for you. The right connections, the right opportunities." "I know you believe that," Juliet said gently. "But what about what I want? Did either of you ever ask?" "We assumed." Margaret trailed off, realizing the truth in her daughter's words. "That's the problem. Everyone assumed they knew what was best for me." Juliet sat beside her mother. "I'm not rejecting everything you and Father built. I'm just asking for the chance to build something of my own." Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "This was my grandmother's. She gave it to me when I turned 21 and told me to save it for my daughter." She opened the box to reveal a delicate gold locket with a small diamond in the center. "It's not from the Langdon side," Margaret continued. "It's from my family, before I married your father and took his name." She placed the box in Juliet's hand. "Whatever happens, whatever you decide to do with your life, remember where you came from, all of where you came from." Tears filled Juliet's eyes. It wasn't the grand reconciliation she might have hoped for, but it was something, an acknowledgement that she was more than just a Langdon. "Thank you," she whispered, hugging her mother tightly. Margaret held her for a moment, then pulled back, quickly wiping her own eyes. "Your father can't know I was here. He's very hurt, Juliet. I never meant to hurt either of you. I know." Margaret stood up, straightening her perfect outfit. "Where will you go?" "I'll find a place," Juliet said, not wanting to worry her mother with the uncertainty of her plans. Margaret nodded, clearly fighting her instinct to take control of the situation. "Call me when you're settled, not the house phone, my cell." It was a small rebellion on her mother's part, a tiny step toward accepting Juliet's choice. As Margaret left, Juliet felt a glimmer of hope that perhaps, in time, the breach with her family might be healed. With the help of Mrs. Reynolds, Juliet loaded her belongings into a taxi as she prepared to leave. Casey, the housekeeper, pressed a piece of paper into her hand. "My nephew Thomas, the one who helped with the tuxedo, he manages an apartment building downtown. It's not fancy, but it's clean and safe. Tell him I sent you." Juliet hugged the older woman gratefully. "Thank you for everything, Mrs. Reynolds." "You show them what you're made of, Miss Langdon," Mrs. Reynolds said firmly. "Some people may be born with silver spoons, but it's what you do when the spoon is taken away that shows your true character." Thomas Reynolds turned out to be as kind as his aunt. The apartment he showed Juliet was indeed small, a studio with a tiny kitchen and bathroom, but it was clean and bright, with a window that looked out over a small park. "It's not what you're used to," he said apologetically. "It's perfect," Juliet replied, meaning it. "How much is the rent?" When he told her, she did a quick mental calculation. Her savings would cover several months, but she would need to find a job soon. "I'll take it," she said decisively. That evening, Jalen helped her move in her few belongings. The apartment looked sparse with just her suitcase and a few boxes, but it was hers. The first space that truly belonged to her alone. "It needs some furniture," Jalen observed, looking around the nearly empty room. "I'll get some second-hand pieces," Juliet said, "once I find a job." Jalen looked at her with a mixture of admiration and concern. "You're really doing this. Did you think I wouldn't?" "I wasn't sure," he admitted. "Walking away from everything you've known, it's a big step." Juliet sat on one of the boxes, suddenly overwhelmed by the enormity of what she had done. "I'm terrified," she confessed. "I've never had to worry about money or jobs or anything real. What if I can't do this?" Jalen sat beside her. "You can, and you don't have to do it alone. I feel like I need to prove something to myself as much as to my parents." "There are different kinds of independence," Jalen said. "True strength isn't about doing everything by yourself. It's about making your own choices and building your own support system." He was right, Juliet realized. Independence didn't mean isolation. It meant creating a life based on her own values and choices. The next few weeks were a crash course in real-world living. Juliet had never done her own laundry, cooked her own meals, or managed a budget. Simple tasks that most people took for granted became challenging adventures. She applied for jobs at shops, cafes, and offices throughout Boston, but quickly discovered that her resume, filled with charity committee positions and social club memberships, didn't impress potential employers looking for actual work experience. After a particularly discouraging day of rejections, she returned to her apartment to find Jalen waiting outside her door with takeout containers and a bottle of wine. "Bad day?" he asked, noting her expression. "The worst," she sighed, unlocking her door. "I'm beginning to think no one in Boston will hire Juliet Langdon." "Because of your name?" "Because I have no marketable skills." She flopped onto her second-hand sofa, a find from a thrift store that Jalen had helped her carry up 3 flights of stairs. "What am I qualified to do? Plan galas? Choose the right fork at dinner? None of that matters in the real world." Jalen unpacked the food, giving her a moment to vent her frustrations. "You're smart, articulate, and you know how to connect with people. Those are valuable skills in any context. Not according to the 7 places that rejected me today." Juliet accepted the plate he handed her. "My savings won't last forever. I need to figure something out." "What about the hotel business? You must have picked up something growing up in that world." Juliet considered this. It was true that she had spent her life around hotels, listening to her father discuss operations, watching managers and staff at work. But would any hotel hire the daughter of Richard Langdon, especially after her very public break with her family? "I don't know," she said doubtfully. "The Langdon name might be more of a liability than an asset right now." "Then don't use it," Jalen suggested. "Apply as Juliet. What was your mother's maiden name?" "Parker," Juliet said, considering the idea. "Juliet Parker." The name felt strange on her tongue, but also liberating. The next day, she applied to 3 boutique hotels as Juliet Parker. At the third, a charming historical hotel called the Whitmore, the manager was impressed by her knowledge of the industry and her enthusiasm. "You have no direct experience," she said, reviewing Juliet's carefully edited resume, "but you clearly understand the business. We need a guest relations coordinator. It's entry level, but there's room for growth." Juliet left with a job offer starting the following Monday. The salary was modest, but it would cover her rent and basic expenses. More importantly, it was a position she had earned entirely on her own merits. That weekend, Jalen helped her prepare for her first day of work. They went shopping for affordable business attire. Nothing like the designer clothes that had filled her closet at the Langdon estate, but professional and practical. "How do I look?" she asked, modeling a simple black skirt and white blouse. "Like someone who's about to take the hotel world by storm," Jalen replied with a smile. On Monday morning, Juliet arrived at the Whitmore 30 minutes early, nervous but excited. The Hotel W is nothing like the grand establishments her father owned, smaller, more intimate, with a focus on personalized service rather than luxury amenities. Her new boss, Mrs. Collins, gave her a quick tour and orientation. "Most of our guests are business travelers or tourists looking for an authentic Boston experience," she explained. "Your job is to make sure they get it, handling special requests, resolving issues, coordinating with other departments to ensure guest satisfaction." The work was challenging but rewarding. Juliet discovered that she had a natural talent for anticipating guests' needs and solving problems efficiently. By the end of her first week, Mrs. Collins was already impressed with her performance. "You have good instincts," she told Juliet. "Most new hires take months to develop the kind of judgment you're already showing." What her boss didn't know was that Juliet had spent her entire life observing how people interacted in high-pressure social situations. The skills she had developed as the Langdon heiress, reading people, diffusing tension, making everyone feel valued, transferred perfectly to her new role. As weeks passed, Juliet settled into a routine that felt increasingly natural. She worked during the day, sometimes taking extra shifts to build her savings. In the evenings, she often spent time with Jalen, cooking simple meals in her tiny kitchen or helping him with his architecture projects. Their relationship deepened gradually, built on mutual respect and genuine connection, rather than the calculated compatibility her parents had sought in their choice of Bradley Williams. Jalen challenged her intellectually, supported her emotionally, and never made her feel like she needed to be anyone but herself. One evening, as they walked through the park near her apartment, Jalen brought up something that had been on both their minds. "Have you spoken to your parents at all?" Juliet shook her head. "I've talked to my mother a few times. Brief calls, mostly her checking that I'm safe. Nothing substantive. My father still refuses to speak to me. Do you regret it, walking away?" She considered the question carefully. "I miss them. I miss the security sometimes. But no, I don't regret it. For the first time in my life, I'm proud of what I'm accomplishing. Not because of my name or my family's position, but because of my own efforts." Jalen squeezed her hand. "You should be proud. What you've done takes real courage." "I couldn't have done it without you," she admitted. "Your support has meant everything." "You would have found your way," he said confidently. "But I'm glad I could be part of the journey." They stopped by a small pond where ducks swam lazily in the evening light. It was a perfect moment, peaceful, ordinary, and completely their own. "I love you," Juliet said softly, the words coming naturally without calculation or expectation. Jalen turned to her, his eyes warm with emotion. "I love you too. Not the Langdon heiress, not the woman who made headlines by bringing me to that gala. Just you, Juliet." Their kiss was gentle and deep, a promise and a celebration rolled into one. As summer approached, Juliet received a promotion at the Whitmore. Her new role as assistant events manager played to her strengths, allowing her to use her experience with high society functions in a more accessible, community-oriented context. "We're hosting a charity fundraiser next month," Mrs. Collins told her. "Local businesses supporting youth education programs. I'd like you to take the lead on organizing it." Juliet threw herself into the project with enthusiasm. This was familiar tea, hereditary, but with a difference. Instead of ostentatious displays of wealth, the focus was on bringing the community together for a worthy cause. As she worked on the event, contacting local vendors and coordinating with the charity representatives, she couldn't help but compare it to the galas her father had hosted. Those had been designed to impress and intimidate, to reinforce the Langdons' position at the top of Boston's social hierarchy. This event felt more genuine, more purposeful. One afternoon, as she was finalizing the seating arrangements in the hotel's small ballroom, Mrs. Collins approached with an unusual expression. "Juliet, there's someone here to see you." Something in her boss's tone made Juliet look up sharply. "Who is it?" "Richard Langdon." Juliet's heart seemed to stop. "My father is here." Mrs. Collins nodded, looking confused. "He asked for you by name, by your full name, Juliet Langdon. Is there something I should know?" For a moment, Juliet considered fleeing out the back entrance, but she had spent the past months building a life based on honesty and authenticity. She couldn't run now. "Richard Langdon is my father," she admitted. "I've been using my mother's maiden name." Understanding dawned on Mrs. Collins' face. "The heiress from the news stories, the gala?" "Yes," Juliet said simply. "I'm sorry I wasn't completely honest." To her surprise, Mrs. Collins smiled. "Everyone has a past, Juliet. What matters is the work you've done here, which has been exceptional. Your father is waiting in the small conference room when you're ready." Taking a deep breath, Juliet straightened her simple work dress and made her way to the conference room. Her father sat at the table, looking strangely out of place in his bespoke suit and expensive watch. For the first time, Juliet saw him not as the intimidating patriarch of the Langdon Empire, but simply as a man. Powerful, yes, but also aging, with lines of worry etched into his face. "Father," she said, closing the door behind her. Richard looked up, his expression unreadable. "Juliet." She sat across from him, maintaining her composure despite her racing heart. "How did you find me?" "Your mother," he admitted. "She's been keeping tabs on you, though she thought I didn't care now." Of course. The brief phone calls had been her mother's way of checking that she was safe and well. "Why are you here?" Juliet asked directly. Richard shifted uncomfortably. "To see for myself, to confirm what your mother has been telling me, that you're actually making it on your own." "Did you think I wouldn't?" "Frankly, yes." His honesty was startling. "You've never had to work for anything, Juliet. Everything was given to you. I expected you to come crawling back within a month when you realized how hard the real world can be. The old Juliet might have been hurt by his lack of faith in her. The new Juliet found it almost amusing. Then I guess I've surprised both of us." Richard looked around the modest conference room. "Assistant events manager, your mother told me about the promotion." "It's not running a hotel empire," Juliet acknowledged, "but it's mine. I earned it." A flicker of something that might have been respect crossed her father's face. "And the night cleaner, is he still in the picture?" "Jalen," Juliet corrected firmly. "His name is Jalen Price, and yes, he's very much in my life. He's finishing his master's degree next month, and he's already had job offers from 2 architectural firms." Richard nodded, absorbing this information. "Your mother misses you," he said after a pause. "The house isn't the same without you." It was as close to sentimentality as Richard Langdon ever came. "I miss her too," Juliet said softly. "I miss both of you, despite everything." "Come home for dinner," Richard said abruptly. "Next Sunday, your mother would be thrilled, and I would like to hear more about what you've been doing." Juliet was stunned by the invitation. "Just me, or—" "Bring him," Richard said, the words clearly difficult for him. "This Jalen, if he's important unto you, then we should meet him properly." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a full acceptance of her choices, but from her proud, stubborn father, it was an enormous concession. "I'll ask him," Juliet said cautiously. "But I need to know this isn't a trap or a trick to pressure me into coming back." "It's not," Richard assured her. "Your mother has made it abundantly clear that trying to force you to return would only push you further away. This is an attempt to understand." As her father stood to leave, Juliet felt a surge of emotion. Despite all that had happened, he was still her father, the man who had taught her to ride a bike, who had carried her on his shoulders at parades when she was small, who had, in his own flawed way, always wanted what he thought was best for her. "Sunday at 7?" she confirmed. Richard nodded. "Sunday at 7. When he was gone, Juliet sat alone in the Confrey NCE room, processing what had just happened. After months of silence, her father had made the first move toward reconciliation. It wasn't a total surrender. Richard Langdon would never fully abandon his vision of what his daughter's life should be, but it was an acknowledgement that she had proven herself capable of making her own way. That evening, she told Jalen about her father's visit and the dinner invitation. "Are you going to go?" he asked, helping her chop vegetables for their dinner. "I'd like to," she admitted, "but only if you'll come with me." Jalen put down the knife and turned to face her. "Are you sure that's a good idea? Your father and I didn't exactly hit it off at our last encounter." "That's why it's important," Juliet insisted. "If there's going to be any kind of relationship between me and my parents going forward, they need to accept that you're part of my life. Not as a statement or a rebellion, but as the man I love." Jalen considered this, his expression thoughtful. "Okay," he said finally, "but on one condition." "What's that?" "We go as ourselves. Not as the Langdon heiress and the night cleaner, but as Juliet and Jalen, who we really are now." Juliet smiled, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. That's exactly how we'll go. The days leading up to Sunday dinner were filled with nervous anticipation. Juliet chose her outfit carefully, a simple but elegant dress that reflected her new life rather than her old one. Jalen wore a well-cut suit that he had purchased for job interviews, looking every inch the accomplished professional he was becoming. As their taxi approached the Langdon estate, Juliet felt a strange mixture of nostalgia and apprehension. This had been her home for 24 years, but now she was returning as a visitor, bringing a man her parents had once deemed completely unsuitable. "Ready?" Jalen asked as they stood at the front door. Juliet took his hand. "With you? Always." Mrs. Reynolds opened the door, her face lighting up at the sight of Juliet. "Welcome home, Miss Langdon, and Mr. Price. How lovely to see you again." The warm greeting helped ease some of Juliet's tension. As they were led to the formal living room, she squeezed Jalen's hand for reassurance. Margaret Langdon rose immediately when they entered, crossing the room to embrace her daughter with unusual emotion. "Juliet, darling, you look wonderful." Richard stood more slowly, nodding a greeting. "Juliet, Mr. Price." "Thank you for inviting us," Juliet said formally. "Please, sit down," Margaret urged, gesturing to the sofa. "Dinner will be ready soon, but I thought we might have drinks first." The conversation was stilted at first, with Margaret doing most of the talking, asking polite questions about Juliet's job and apartment. Richard watched Jalen with guarded curiosity, saying little. "I understand you're completing your master's degree," he said finally, addressing Jalen directly. "Yes, sir. In architectural design, with a focus on sustainable urban development." "And you've had job offers?" Jalen nodded. "Two so far. One from a firm in Boston, another in Chicago." Richard's eyebrows rose slightly. "Chicago? That's quite a distance from Boston." Juliet felt a flicker of anxiety. She and Jalen hadn't yet discussed what would happen after his graduation. The possibility of him moving to Chicago had been a looming conversation they'd both avoided. "I haven't made any decisions yet," Jalen said, glancing at Juliet. "There are a lot of factors to consider." Before Richard could press further, Mrs. Reynolds announced that dinner was served. They moved to the dining room, where the table had been set with the family's finest china and crystal, a sign that Margaret, at least, was taking this reconciliation seriously. As they ate, the conversation gradually became more natural. Jalen spoke passionately about his thesis project, a design for affordable housing that incorporated green spaces and community areas. To Juliet's surprise, her father seemed genuinely interested, asking detailed questions about the financial feasibility and potential for scaling the concept. "The problem with most affordable housing," Richard said, warming to the topic, "is that developers cut corners to maximize profits. But if you could demonstrate that thoughtful design actually increases long-term value." "Exactly," Jalen agreed. "It's about changing the paradigm from short-term gain to sustainable community building." Watching them talk, finding unexpected common ground in the business aspects of architecture and development, Juliet felt a surge of hope. Her father was engaging with Jalen not as the help or as her unsuitable choice, but as a professional with valuable ideas. After dinner, as they moved back to the living room for coffee, Margaret pulled Juliet aside while the men continued their conversation. "He's very impressive," she admitted quietly. "Not at all what we expected." "What did you expect?" Juliet asked. Margaret had the grace to look embarrassed. "Someone less educated, less articulate, less—" she struggled to find the right word. "Less equal?" Juliet suggested. "Perhaps," Margaret acknowledged. "We made assumptions based on his job, not who he actually is. That was wrong of us." It wasn't a full apology, but it was a significant admission from a woman who had spent her life judging people based on their social status. "He makes you happy," Margaret observed, "though I can see it in the way you look at each other." "He does," Juliet confirmed. "He sees me, the real me, not just the Langdon heiress." Margaret's eyes filled with unexpected tears. "That's all I ever wanted for you, darling. Someone who would value you for yourself." Later, as they prepared to leave, Richard pulled Juliet aside while Margaret showed Jalen some of the architectural features of the historic mansion. "You've done well," he said gruffly. Your mother was right. You're happy, independent. I am, Juliet agreed. Thank you for seeing that. Richard cleared his throat. About your position in the company, your inheritance. Nothing has been finalized yet. There's still a place for you, if you want it. Juliet was stunned by the offer. Are you saying you're willing to accept my choices, my relationship with Jalen? I'm saying I'm willing to try, Richard replied, the words clearly difficult for him. He's not what I would have chosen for you, but he's clearly intelligent and ambitious, and most importantly, he seems to genuinely care for you, not your name or your money. It was more than Juliet had hoped for, not a complete surrender of her father's expectations, but an opening, a chance to rebuild their relationship on new terms. I don't know if I want to come back to the company, she said honestly. I'm finding my own path now, and I need to see where it leads. But thank you for the offer. It means a lot. Richard nodded, understanding in his eyes. The door is open whenever you're ready. In the meantime, your mother would appreciate more regular visits. Sunday dinners, perhaps. I'd like that, Juliet said softly. And Jalen? He would be welcome, Richard managed, the concession clearly significant for him. As they left the estate, Jalen was quiet, processing the evening. That went better than I expected, Juliet said as they walked down the long driveway. Your father is an interesting man, Jalen replied. Stubborn, controlling, but also intelligent and perceptive. I can see where you get your determination. Juliet laughed. I never thought of myself as stub-born before all this. It takes a special kind of stubbornness to walk away from everything you've known to build something new, Jalen pointed out. It's one of the things I admire most about you. They reached the main gate, where a taxi was waiting to take them back to Juliet's apartment. Before they got in, Jalen stopped, turning to face her with a serious expression. There's something we need to talk about, he said. Something I've been avoiding. Juliet's heart sank. Chicago. He nodded. The offer there is exceptional. A chance to work with one of the leading sustainable design firms in the country. Oh, Juliet said softly, trying to hide her disappointment. When would you need to start? August, if I accept. Jalen took her hands in his. But I wanted to talk to you before making any decisions. These past months with you have been the most meaningful of my life. I don't want to lose the at. I don't want to hold you back, Juliet said, her voice catching. This is an amazing opportunity for you. It is, Jalen agreed. But there are other opportunities, other paths. What are you saying? Jalen took a deep breath. I'm saying that I love you, Juliet. That whatever decision I make, I want it to be one we make together. If Chicago is right for my career but means being apart from you, then maybe it's not the right choice after all. The words hung between them, full of meaning and possibility. Juliet had spent her entire life having decisions made for her. Now, Jalen was offering her a voice in a decision that would affect both their futures. What about the Boston offer? She asked. It's good, though not as prestigious. The firm is smaller, more local in focus, but it would mean staying here, continuing what we've started. Juliet thought about her job at the Whitmore, her tiny apartment, the life she had built for herself. She thought about Sunday dinners with her parents, the fragile reconciliation that was just beginning. And she thought about Jalen, the man who had supported her through the most challenging transition of her life, who had seen her value when she was still discovering it herself. I think, she said slowly, that we need to consider all options, including the possibility that I might come to Chicago with you. Jalen looked surprised. You'd do that? Leave everything you've built here? What I've built is a life where I make my own choices, Juliet replied. Where I follow my heart instead of other people's expectations. And my heart is with you, Jalen. He pulled her close, holding her tightly as if afraid she might disappear. We don't have to decide tonight, he murmured against her hair. We have time to figure this out together. As they rode back to her apartment, Juliet leaned her head on Jalen's shoulder, feeling strangely at peace despite the uncertainty ahead. 6 months ago, she had been the perfectly groomed Langdon heiress, her life mapped out by her parents' ambitions. Now she was simply Juliet, finding her way in the world on her own terms, with the man she loved beside her. Whatever they decided about Chicago, whatever path they chose, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would never regret the night she had stood up in that dining room and said, "I'm bringing Jalen." It had been the first truly independent choice of her life, and it had led her to discover strengths, capabilities, and depths of feeling she never knew she possessed. As they reached her apartment building, Jalen took her hand. "Whatever happens next," he said softly, "I want you to know that I'm proud of you, of what you've accomplished, of who you've become." "I'm proud of us," Juliet replied, "of what we've built together." They climbed the stairs to her small apartment, their future uncertain but full of possibilities. Possibilities they would explore together as equals, guided by love rather than expectation or convention. And for Juliet Langdon, who had spent her life following a script written by others, that was the greatest freedom of all. July arrived with sweltering heat that seemed to slow the pace of the entire city. Juliet's tiny apartment became unbearably hot during the day, with only a small window unit struggling to provide relief. But despite the discomfort, she felt a deep contentment with her life that no amount of luxury in the Langdon mansion could have provided. Her position at the Whitmore had expanded beyond event planning to include more responsibilities in guest relations and marketing. Mrs. Collins had become both a boss and a mentor, teaching Juliet the practical aspects of hotel management that her father had never bothered to share with her. "You have a natural instinct for this business," Mrs. Collins told her one afternoon as they reviewed the success of the charity fundraiser. "You understand that hospitality is about making people feel valued, not just impressed." It was a different approach than her father's focus on luxury and exclusivity, but Juliet found it deeply satisfying. Creating genuine experiences for guests from all walks of life felt more meaningful than catering only to the elite. Her relationship with Jalen had deepened as well. They had fallen into a comfortable routine, spending most evenings together, alternating between her apartment and his. On weekends, they explored parts of Boston that Juliet had never seen despite living there her entire life. Small neighborhood festivals, hidden parks, community gardens, and local markets. Through Jalen's eyes, she discovered a side of the city that existed beyond the rarefied world of galas and charity luncheons. A world that was vibrant, diverse, and authentic in ways her sheltered upbringing had never prepared her for. "How did I live here my whole life and never know about this place?" she asked one Saturday, as they browsed a bustling farmer's market in a neighborhood her parents would have considered beneath age notice. Jalen smiled, selecting a ripe peach from a vendor's stand. "There are a lot of invisible boundaries in every city, lines most people never cross because they don't have a reason to." "I'm glad I crossed them," Juliet said, watching a group of children playing near a fountain. "I feel like I'm finally seeing the real world." "The real world has its challenges too," Jalen reminded her, always the pragmatist. "But at least you're experiencing it on your own terms now." Those terms included rebuilding her relationship with her parents, one careful step at a time. Sunday dinners at the Langdon estate had become a regular tradition over the past month. Each week, the atmosphere grew slightly less tense, the conversation a little more natural. Richard had begun to show a grudging respect for Jalen, particularly after visiting the exhibition of graduate architectural projects at MIT. Jalen's design for sustainable community housing had won the department's top award, and even Richard had to acknowledge the intelligence and vision behind the work. "Your young man has talent," he admitted to Juliet after the exhibition. "Real talent, not just ambition." It wasn't effusive praise, but from Richard Langdon it was significant recognition. Margaret had made more obvious efforts to welcome Jalen, asking about his family in Chicago and his plans after graduation. She still occasionally made tone-deaf comments that revealed the limitations of her worldview, but she was trying, and for Margaret, raised in the same privileged bubble as Juliet, that was progress. The question of Chicago, however, still loomed over Juliet and Jalen. July was passing quickly, and Jalen needed to give the firm his decision by the end of the month. They had discussed all the options, him staying in Boston, her moving to Chicago, some compromise involving long distance, but had yet to reach a final decision. One evening, As they sat on the small balcony of Juliet's apartment, sharing a simple dinner, Jalen brought up the subject that had been hovering between them. "I spoke with the Chicago firm today," he said, his expression serious. "They need my answer by Friday." Juliet felt her heart tighten. "What are you thinking?" Jalen put down his fork, choosing his words carefully. "I'm thinking that it's an incredible opportunity, the kind that doesn't come along often, especially for someone just starting their career." "But," Juliet prompted, hearing the hesitation in his voice. "But there's you," he said simply. "Us. What we've built here. Your job at the Whitmore, your reconciliation with your parents. I don't want to be the reason you have to leave all that behind." Juliet reached across the small table and took his hand. "What if I told you I've been thinking about Chicago too, about what it might be like to start fresh somewhere new?" Jalen looked surprised. "You'd consider moving?" "More than consider," Juliet said. "I've been doing some research. There are several boutique hotels in Chicago that might be a good fit for my experience. And," she hesitated, then continued, "I spoke with my father about it." "Your father? I thought he'd be dead set against you leaving Boston." "So did I," Juliet admitted. "But he surprised me. He said that the Langdon hotels are looking to expand into the Chicago market, and having someone familiar with the city would be valuable." "Wait," Jalen said, looking confused. "Is he offering you a job?" Juliet nodded. "A real one, not just a ceremonial position. Development and community relations for a potential new property. He says it would be at least a year before anything concrete happens. But in the meantime, I could learn the Chicago hotel landscape, make connections." Jalen sat back, processing this unexpected development. "How do you feel about that? Working for your father again? Being part of the family business?" It was a complicated question, one Juliet had been wrestling with since her father made the offer a week ago. "It wouldn't be like before," she said slowly. "I'd be coming in with actual experience now, not just as T.H. Langdon heiress. And I'd be building something new, not just maintaining what already exists." "But would it make you happy?" Jalen pressed. "These past months you've found your own path. Would going back to the Langdon name, even in a different city, feel like a step backward?" Juliet considered his question carefully. "A few months ago it might have. But now, I think I'm secure enough in who I am to work with my father without losing myself again. I've proven, to him and to myself, that I can make it on my own. Taking this opportunity wouldn't erase that." Jalen was quiet for a moment, then a slow smile spread across his face. "So we're really considering this, both of us in Chicago?" The hope in his voice made Juliet's heart swell. "I think we are, if that's what you want." "What I want," Jalen said, rising from his chair and pulling her to her feet, "is to be wherever you are, to build a Life together, whether that's in Boston or Chicago or anywhere else." He held her close, and Juliet felt a profound sense of rightness. This was what real love looked like. Not the calculated matches her parents had tried to arrange, but a partnership of equals, supporting each other's dreams and finding paths forward together. "Chicago it is then," she whispered against his chest. The decision made, they threw themselves into planning for the move. Juliet gave notice at the Whitmore, where Mrs. Collins was disappointed but understanding. "You've grown so much in the time you've been here," she told Juliet warmly. "The Whitmore was just a stepping stone for you. I always knew you were destined for bigger things." Jalen finished his degree with honors and accepted the position in Chicago, scheduled to start in mid-August. They found an apartment in a diverse neighborhood, not far from where he would be, working. Nothing luxurious but spacious and bright, with room for both of them to establish their new life together. The Sunday before they were scheduled to leave, Richard and Margaret hosted a farewell dinner at the Langdon estate. To Juliet's surprise, her father had invited several family friends and business associates, making it a more formal occasion than their usual Sunday gatherings. "Your father has something up his sleeve," Margaret confided as she helped Juliet adjust her dress before dinner. "He's been unusually secretive about tonight." Juliet felt a flicker of apprehension. Had her father reverted to his old controlling ways? Was this some elaborate scheme to keep her in Boston after all? When they joined the others in the dining room, Juliet was relieved to see that Jalen seemed relaxed and comfortable, engaged in conversation with one of her father's business partners. Whatever Chard was planning, Jalen didn't appear concerned. Midway through the meal, Richard stood and tapped his glass for attention. The room quieted, all eyes turning to the patriarch of the Langdon family. "As most of you know," he began, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to commanding attention, "my daughter Juliet and her partner, Jalen Price, will be leaving for Chicago this week to pursue new opportunities." There was polite applause around the table. Juliet noticed that Richard had hesitated before the word partner, as if still not entirely comfortable with the relationship, but at least he had acknowledged it publicly. "What some of you may not know," Richard continued, "is that Juliet will be representing Langdon Hotels in Chicago, exploring potential sites for our expansion into that market." This announcement was met with murmurs of interest from the business associates P. Resent. Juliet felt a surge of pride that her father was presenting her role as legitimate and significant, not just a token position. "In preparation for this new chapter," Richard said, turning to look directly at Juliet, "I've had our legal team prepare some documents." He nodded to his assistant, who stepped forward with a leather portfolio. "These papers," Richard explained, opening the portfolio, "restore Juliet's position as a Langdon heir, with all the responsibilities and privileges that entails." Juliet felt a complex mix of emotions. On one hand, she was touched that her father was publicly acknowledging her return to the family. On the other, she worried about what strings might be attached to this gesture. "There is, however, one significant change from our previous arrangement," Richard added, a hint of something unfamiliar in his voice. Was it pride? Respect? "Juliet will have complete autonomy over the Chicago project. Her reports will come directly to me, but the decisions will be hers to make." The significance of this concession wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Richard Langdon, notorious for his micromanagement and control, was giving his daughter real authority and independence within the company. "Additionally," Richard continued, clearing his throat, "I've established a separate foundation focused on community development, and affordable housing initiatives. Juliet will serve as chairperson, with the authority to direct resources as she sees fit." At this, Juliet gasped softly. It was an acknowledgement not just of her return to the family, but of the values she had developed during her time away, values that differed from the traditional Langdon focus on luxury and exclusivity. "And," Richard added, turning to Jalen, "we hope that Mr. Price might consider lending his expertise to this foundation, particularly in the area of sustainable design." Jalen looked as surprised as Juliet felt. "I'd be honored to contribute," he said, his voice steady despite the unexpected offer. After dinner, while the guests mingled over coffee and dessert, Richard pulled Juliet aside into his study. "I want you to understand something," he said, more earnest than she had ever seen him. "This isn't just about getting you back into the fold or controlling your future from a distance." "Then what is it about?" Juliet asked, still wary of her father's intentions. Richard sighed, suddenly looking older and more vulnerable. "It's about recognizing that you were right, at least partly, about needing to find your own way, make your own choices." He moved to the window, looking out at the gardens where generations of Langdons had walked. "I built this company from what my father started, expanded it beyond anything he could have imagined. I always assumed you would simply step into the role I created for you." "But that wasn't what I needed," Juliet said gently. "No," Richard agreed. "You needed to prove yourself to yourself as much as to me, and you have." He turned to face her. "These past months, watching you build a life on your own terms, I've never been more proud of you, Juliet." The admission, so unlike her usually reserved father, brought tears to Juliet's eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "The foundation is real," Richard continued, "as is your authority over the Chicago project. No strings, no hidden agendas, just recognition that you've earned. The right to shape your own role in the family legacy." "And Jalen?" Juliet asked. "That offer wasn't just for show." Richard's expression turned wry. "He's talented. Anyone with eyes can see that. And while he wouldn't have been my choice for you—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I can acknowledge that your choice has merit. He challenges you, supports you, makes you stronger rather than diminishing you." It was as close to a full blessing as Juliet could have hoped for. Not the enthusiastic approval a daughter might dream of, but a pragmatic acceptance born of respect rather than mere tolerance. "Thank you," she said again, embracing her father impulsively. Richard stiffened for a moment, then returned the hug awkwardly. "Just make us proud in Chicago," he said gruffly. "Both of you." Later that night, as Juliet and Jalen drove back to her apartment, she filled him in on her conversation with her father. "So the foundation offer is legitimate?" Jalen asked, clearly intrigued by the possibility. "Completely," Juliet confirmed. "With real funding and autonomy. He wants you involved because of your expertise, not just as a way to keep me happy." Jalen whistled softly. "That's unexpected." "My father is full of surprises lately," Juliet agreed. "I think watching me walk away from everything actually changed him, made him reevaluate what he matters." "And what about you?" Jalen asked, glancing at her as he drove. "How do you feel about going back to the Langdon fold, even in this new way?" Juliet looked out at the city passing by, the lights of Boston twinkling against the night sky. This had been her home all her life, the center of her world. Leaving would be harder than she had admitted, even to herself. "I think," she said slowly, "that I needed to break away completely to understand what parts of that life were worth keeping. I'm not the same person I was before. I won't ever be that perfectly polished Langdon heiress again, existing only to fulfill my parents' expectations." "No," Jalen agreed with a smile, "that ship has definitely sailed. But there are aspects of the Langdon legacy worth preserving, worth building on," Juliet continued. "My father created something significant, using that platform to do good, to implement some of the values I've discovered these past months. That feels right to me." Jalen reached over and took her hand. "As long as it's your choice, your authentic choice." "It is," Juliet said with certainty. "For the first time, I feel like I'm moving forward with clear eyes. Not rebelling, not conforming, just choosing." The week that followed was a whirlwind of packing, goodbyes, and last-minute preparations. Juliet was surprised by how much she had accumulated in her small apartment, evidence of the independent life she had built piece by piece. Mrs. Reynolds came to help on their final day in Boston, bringing home-cooked food and practical advice about the move. She had become a surrogate mother figure to Juliet during the months of estrangement from her parents, and saying goodbye was unexpectedly emotional. "You've become the strong, independent woman I always knew you could be," Mrs. Reynolds said, hugging Juliet tightly. "Don't forget the lessons you've learned here when you're back in the world of luxury and privilege." "I won't," Juliet promised. "And it's not goodbye forever. We'll be back to visit." "See that you do," Mrs. Reynolds said firmly. "And bring this handsome man with you. He's a keeper." Jalen, overhearing this exchange, smiled as he sealed another moving box. "Yes, ma'am, I wouldn't miss your apple pie for anything." There, last night in Boston, they stayed at the Langdon Grand Hotel at Margaret's insistence. "You can't spend your final night in that tiny apartment with all the furniture gone," she had declared, arranging for the presidential suite to be prepared for them. It felt strange to be back in such luxurious surroundings after months of simple living. The suite was larger than Juliet's entire apartment, with panoramic views of the city and every amenity imaginable. "Does it feel like going backward?" Jalen asked as they stood by the window, looking out at the Boston skyline illuminated against the night sky. Juliet considered the question. "No," she said finally. "It feels like visiting a place I used to live, familiar, but not home anymore." "And where is home now?" Jalen asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Juliet leaned back against his solid warmth. "Wherever we are together," she said simply. "See Chicago, Boston, anywhere. Home isn't about the address or the furnishings. It's about feeling fully yourself, fully accepted." Jalen kissed the top of her head. "You've come a long way from that night in the ballroom when you first spoke to the night cleaner." "We both have," Juliet replied, turning in his arms to face him. "Back then, I was just starting to question the life that had been planned for me. I had no idea where that questioning would lead." "Any regrets?" Jalen asked, his eyes searching hers. "Not one," Juliet said with complete conviction. "Everything that happened, the scandal, being cut off, building a life from scratch, it was all worth it. It led me to this moment, to knowing who I really am and what I really want. "And what is it that you want, Juliet Langdon?" Jalen asked softly. "A life of my own making," she replied. "A career that means something. And you, Jalen Price, by my side through all of it." The next morning, they loaded the last of their belongings into the moving truck and prepared to set off for Chicago. Margaret had come to see them off, bringing a basket of food for the journey and barely concealing her tears behind designer sunglasses. "Call me when you arrive," she insisted, hugging Juliet tightly. "And at every stop along the way, I'll worry otherwise." "We'll be fine, Mother," Juliet assured her, touched by Margaret's concern, despite its somewhat smothering nature. To everyone's surprise, Richard arrived just as they were about to leave. He wasn't one for emotional goodbyes, but he handed Jalen an envelope with a gruff nod. "Contacts in Chicago," he explained. "People who might be useful for both your careers." "Thank you, sir," Jalen said, genuinely appreciating the gesture. Richard turned to Juliet, his expression softening slightly. "Make us proud," H.E. said, echoing his words from the dinner. But this time he added, "Be happy. That's what matters most." Coming from Richard Langdon, who had spent his life prioritizing success and status over happiness, it was a profound statement. Juliet hugged him tightly, feeling the circle of their relationship close and open again in a new, healthier configuration. As they drove away from Boston, the city where Juliet had spent her entire life until now, she felt a complex mixture of emotions: nostalgia, excitement, apprehension, and above all, a profound sense of rightness about the path she had chosen. Beside her, Jalen reached over and squeezed her hand. "Ready for our next chapter?" Juliet smiled, thinking of all they had overcome to reach this point. The scandal of their first public appearance together, the difficult weeks of establishing her independence, the gradual reconciliation with her family, and, through it all, their growing love, not the superficial attraction of a rebellious heiress to a forbidden man, but a deep, genuine connection between two people who saw and valued each other for who they truly were. "More than ready," she replied, squeezing his hand in return. The road ahead stretched before them, leading to a future neither could have imagined 6 months ago. A future they would build together, choice by choice, day by day. And for Julie, had Langdon, who had once been defined solely by her family name and social position, that freedom to choose, to build a life authentic to her own values and desires, was the most precious gift of all. As Boston receded in the rearview mirror, she leaned her head on Jalen's shoulder, feeling completely at peace with her decision. The whispers and judgments of society no longer mattered. The expectations of her parents no longer defined her. What mattered was the road ahead, and the man beside her, the man she had chosen and who had chosen her in return. "I love you," she said softly, the words simple but filled with meaning. "I love you too," Jalen replied, his eyes briefly leaving the road to meet hers. "Always." The promise hung in the air between them as they drove toward Chicago and their new life together. A life built not on obligation or expectation, but on love, respect, and the courage to choose one's own path. And for Juliet, who had once felt trapped in a gilded cage of privilege and expectation, there could be no greater freedom than that. The end.